Well, good morning. If it's your first week with us, we'll welcome you here. If it's your first week online watching, we're glad you're here too. We're in the middle of a series of sermons through James. James is a very practical book, kind of at the very back of your Bible there, almost before Revelation, and it really hits on the nuts and bolts of what it means to be a Christian. Last week, I was glad that Josh was able to get up and speak for us. He spoke on the first part of James chapter 2 and talked about favoritism and how as Christians, we need to focus on people who maybe we wouldn't normally focus on. Sometimes we focus on people who are rich or good-looking or important, and we find ourselves focusing on people who can help us with our brand, I guess, and we're not focusing so much on people who might be people who Jesus would focus on. So today, I want to kind of continue that theme. We're going to stay in James chapter 2 and go through there, but I'm glad you're here, and hopefully this will be something that you can pull some stuff out of and use yourself. I read this week about a test in psychology. I'm going to ruin it for you. You won't be able to take the test yourself because I'm going to tell you ahead of time how it goes. But it's called the selective attention test. In Harvard is where the experiment was done, and they brought a bunch of Harvard college students in to watch a video. And on the video, there's 6 people, and they're passing a ball back and forth. It's a kickball or basketball-sized ball, and they're tossing it back and forth. And 3 of the 6 people have white shorts on, and 3 of the people have black shorts on. And there's a couple balls, there's no pattern to it, and they're just kind of moving around the circle, and they're tossing the ball back and forth. And what you're supposed to do is count how many times in 30 seconds. That's how long the video is. Count how many times the people in white shorts pass the ball. And it's hard work. It's just 30 seconds, but you've got to really focus as the people in the white shorts are passing back and forth, and you ignore the black shorts, and you're watching them all there in the circle, and they're moving around, and you're trying to log this in your head. You get to the end of the deal, and they'll say, well, and you can find this on YouTube. It's really easy to find. They'll say, how many did you count? And if you got 15, then, well, you got them all. Well, good job. You got all 15. That's really hard. And then they say, well, did you see the gorilla? Now, in the middle of all this, like they're passing the ball back and forth, about 10 seconds in, a gorilla comes in from the side and stands there in the middle of the circle and beats its chest and then walks off. The gorilla's on the screen for 9 seconds. But as you're counting the ball back and forth, you don't even see the gorilla. Well, 50% of the Harvard students did. When they did the test, 50% of the students who were watching this thing never even saw a gorilla. They didn't even notice that there was one. And the reason is what your brain does. You give this command to your brain to focus on people passing the ball, and your brain is conditioned to ignore all the extra data, right? It only focuses on that one thing that you're wanting it to focus on. And the better, some people are really good at it. They can walk through a grassy field and, a 4-leaf clover, and just see it as they're walking along. And I've known guys like that. They're able to eliminate all the other data except for that one thing. You see it pretty commonly when you want to buy something or do something that's expensive. Suddenly, as you want to buy this thing or do it, it seems like everybody you know is doing that thing, or they've bought that, like an Apple Watch. I'm going to get me one of those smart watches. And so now everybody you look has one. It seems like everybody in the world has one, and you don't even notice, you never noticed before how many had it till you wanted one, and now that's all you can see. And your brain is eliminating all the extra data so you can focus just on that one thing that you're most interested in, that one thing. And what your brain does is it helps you to pay attention to the stuff that's most important to you. It helps you to pay attention to the things that you really, really, really care about. Attention, of course, is a pretty valuable thing. Our brains can't focus on everything all the time, and so it's kind of a good thing that it helps you when you're driving. If you were a person who noticed everything while you were driving, you'd be a terrible driver. But your brain kind of conditions to focus just on the road and the things just on the edge of the road there. You learn how to ignore some of the stuff that's a little further away. You learn how to put that out of your mind. But sometimes that ability we have with our brains to eliminate unimportant information, it can work against us. Imagine you're at a ball game. It's a 5th grade girls ball game, and it's not a high scoring affair. We're in the 3rd or 4th quarter, and the score is 4-2, and you've been watching. Mostly people take a shot and miss the shot, and they'll run to the other side, take a shot and miss the shot, and run to the other side. And you're there watching your kid, and you've got some friends who are there to watch their kid, but mom and dad have been on their phones ever since they sat down. right? We used to do this to our kids. Our kids would, when our kids were in high school, they'd say they wanted to go to the football game. And I would tell them, if I ask you at the end of the game what the score was and you can't tell me, you got to pay me back for the tickets. Because I'd pick them up. What was the score? I don't know. They didn't go for the game. They were focused on just their friends, right? They were just focused on that. And I don't know why I did that to them. It's probably bad parenting. Anyway, as I'm thinking about it now, saying it out loud, I don't know that it was a healthy move. Don't do that. But the point being, you end up and you just focus on the things that you want to focus on. You just care about the things you want to care about. And in that case with the parents there at the event, they're not focused on their kid. They're focused on their phones, right? And at some level, you pick up on that. You know, you're at dinner with somebody, and while you're at dinner, their phone buzzes or rings, and they pick it up and they look at it and say, I'll get this later. And in your heart, you think, I won. You know, I'm better than whoever that other person was. But sometimes they take their phone out and they go, oh, I've got to take this. And then you guys sit there while they take it, and you realize you lost, right? You lost. You were important, but you weren't as important as whatever the other thing was. And attention, having somebody who will sit at the table with you and just focus on what you're saying, focus on what you have in mind, who cares about you, really cares about you, that's precious. Because we don't have much attention. And we have an ability, like I said, of eliminating the unimportant information. And these phones, if we don't watch out, we can make the people around us feel like they're not very important as we're focused on things that aren't even there. You remember the song the long time ago, The Cat's in the Cradle, and it was about a dad who had a kid, but he was always too busy for the kid. And the kid kept saying, one day, Dad, I'm going to be like you. And then one day, Dad's retired, right? And he's all done with work, and that's all behind him now. He's ready to retire into these golden years, just enjoy his family, but his son's too busy for him. And remember the song? He grew up just like me, right? And we all know how that works. And yet, if we don't watch out, we can get caught in that same whirlwind that catches everybody else. Jesus had a way of not doing that. For whatever that's worth. He would walk into a crowd, and Jesus had a way of seeing the guys on the edges of the crowd. He walks into a crowd, and there's a blind man off to the side, and he goes and sees that blind man and talks to him. He goes to a deal where a lot of guys are waiting to be healed. They're at this pool that's supposed to have some mystical properties to it, and Jesus goes right to a guy and talks to him. He doesn't see the blur of the crowd. He sees people, and he'll stop and talk to people and share his heart with people. And you get the sense that Jesus is never really rushed by that. I mean, he has things to do. There's things that he's going to. A lot of times, most of the stories, in fact, in the New Testament, is Jesus getting interrupted. He was going from one place to another, and someone stops him. Now, you know about yourself, and I know about myself. If I'm on the way from one place to another and someone stops me, sometimes I'm pretty busy. I don't have time to sit there and talk to whoever it is. I've got things I've got to get done, but Jesus always had time for people. He saw them, right? He didn't ignore them. They weren't extra data that he could ignore. It was right in the center of his vision. And if we want to be followers of Jesus, well, we have to be pretty good at that too. If we want to be followers of Jesus, then we have to be the kind of people who see those things, who notice the people on the edges, who notice the people that Jesus would notice. Sometimes, and I'm just being honest about myself, but I bet you guys do this too, a lot of you do. If I'm at a place where I'm with a lot of strangers, right, maybe like a wedding reception, right, or some event where I'm surrounded by people who I don't know that well, but we're going to be stuck together for a little while, I might scan the room and see if there's people like me that I can go hang out with. I might scan the room and see if there's people who seem like they might care about the things that I care about or are interested in the things that I'm interested in. I look to see maybe who's smarter or richer or more attractive, and I can gravitate towards those people. You don't do it on purpose. You just subtly do it. And again, your mind, you sharpen your focus. Anybody who's going to drag me into some long, awful conversation, or anybody who's going to take my time or energy, or anybody who's going to get me, I'm focused. And I can ignore the guys on the edges. And Jesus never does that. He just never, ever does that. Which is really good news for us, because as sin goes, we were the people on the edges. And Jesus never does that. So if I want to be a disciple of Jesus, then I can't do it either. I have to learn probably to put my focus on the people on the edges, to on purpose put my focus on people that maybe other people would not see right off. That's what Jesus did. And if I want to be a follower of his, then that's what I have to do too. In Matthew 9:36, it says, Jesus saw the crowd, that they were harassed and helpless, like sheep without a shepherd, and his heart hurt for them. Matthew 9:36, his heart was broken for them. And I want to be like that too. Now, this passage in James that we're going through today is probably the most famous passage in James. It's probably the passage that most people know. If you know the book of James at all, would be the passage that you would say, okay, I know about that. I know what he's talking about there. And it was one of those things that when we were dividing up the sermon topics, I saw ahead of time it was something I was going to get to preach on. I was kind of excited about it because I thought, well, I got that. That won't be hard at all. But then when I actually started prepping for it, and thinking through it, there was a couple things that really started to hit me. And it hit me hard enough that I thought, well, I'm taking this too serious, or I'm seeing something here maybe that's not there. And I wondered if maybe I was added stuff to it, but the more I studied it, the more I couldn't get away from it, that maybe I hadn't taken this passage as seriously as I should have. And that may not be your experience, and that's cool if it's not, but I want to just tell you what I found, and if it helps you, then that's awesome. Last week, Josh, remember, talked about prejudice. He talked about and favoritism. Don't show favoritism. Be careful who you show favoritism to. And okay, right after that section, if you were here last week, that's a great sermon. You can go back online and listen to it. But right after that section, he says this thing here. He says, what good is it, he says, if a person claims to have faith but has no deeds? Can such a faith save him? Now, in the King James, it says, if they claim to have faith but have no works. And a lot of the newer translations won't translate it works because that's become kind of a sore spot with people. It's one of those things that Christians like to debate about and fight about, the relationship between faith and deeds. Ultimately, so we're clear, we're saved by our faith. We're saved by our faith. It's not our deeds. You could never do enough work to get in God's good graces. You could never do enough work where God would say, okay, you've done enough. I mean, we're all flawed. We all have mistakes. God's not going to grade on a curve one day, and there's no way that you could do enough. So we're all saved by faith in him. It's just his grace. And it's offered freely to anyone, and anyone can accept it, and you make a decision to put your hand in his hand, and that saves you, right? But what James is saying is, but that doesn't give you the right to say, well, I'm not going to do anything then. If I told my kid when they were in high school, I'm going to love you no matter what you do, and they said to me, well, then I won't do anything. That would have been a problem, right? And they tried that occasionally. They didn't say it out loud, but they did try that occasionally where they wouldn't do anything for a week. We'd have to have a long conversation about how we all are part of this thing together. If I was with Julia and I getting together, and she says, I will love you no matter what, and I said, good news, and then acted like it didn't matter what I did, well, it wouldn't be good news. I mean, that's not what she was trying to say. A person is saved strictly because of God's good graces, but you're saved to be something. You're saved to do something. And that faith that you have should start to affect you just a little bit. I mean, a faith that has no deeds at all, well, what good is that, James says? Can such a faith save them? And the implication is, well, no, it can't. A faith that has no works at all, no deeds at all, nothing behind it at all, well then what? That's nothing. I mean, that's nothing. He kind of amplifies that thought. Hang on. Let me stay on this first, my verses. Jesus says the same thing. Jesus says, not everyone who says to me, Lord, Lord, is going to make it into the kingdom of heaven, but only the one who does the will of my Father, right? Not everybody who says to me, Lord, Lord, is going to get in, but only the people who do something with it. Paul says sort of the same thing. Paul in Romans says, if you live by the flesh, you'll die, but if by the Spirit you put to deeds the misdeeds of the body, put to death the misdeeds of the body, then you'll live. Right? I mean, you're saved by grace, but you're saved to be something, to do something, to be somebody. And real faith in Christ says, I'm going to go someplace. And that's what James means when he says such a faith can't save him. And then he does amplify it. He says in James 2:19, he says, you believe there's one God. Well, great, demons believe that. But it's not a saving faith. As Christians, we believe there's angels and demons, angels that do God's bidding and demons that do what the devil asks them to do. But even the demons believe in God. They just rebel against it. They don't want to do what he says. They would rather rule in hell than serve in heaven, and they go a different direction. And so it's not enough. Julia and I have a friend, he's retired now, but is a professional baseball player. And while he was still playing, he got us tickets to go see him play with the Dodgers. And we went to, while we were in California, we went to the Dodgers game and had our Dodgers jerseys, on and stuff and hats. And after the game, he took us to the players, where the players all exit. And we got to hang out in that same area where the players were. And Mark was there, my son, and he got a few autographs. We got Vin Scully's autograph, and that was kind of cool. And we're right there in the middle of all the Dodgers. But I'm not a Dodger, right? I mean, and nobody would have mistaken me for a Dodger while I was standing there. I mean, they're all athletes, and I'm not an athlete. I mean, and had I said, hey, where are we going after the game to hang out? They wouldn't have taken me with them. I mean, we weren't friends. I wasn't part of that. I mean, I was there with them, but I wasn't really a Dodger. I wasn't really a part of that fraternity. I was just there with them. And it's not enough just to be there with them, James says. It's not enough just to have the thought about it. You've got to commit to what it is. The demons believe, they just don't do anything. And there's a lot of Christians, I guess is the implication here, who believe, but they don't do anything. He says that kind of faith is not going to be enough one day. And I wouldn't be doing my job as a preacher if I didn't mention that sort of thing. It's the kind of thing we ought to reflect on, kind of soberly and to think through. It's not about your works. You can never do enough work to get into heaven, but there ought to be some mark of God's fingerprint on your life. And then James gives an example, and this was the part that really knocked me backwards this week. He says, suppose, now earlier he said, suppose a person has faith and no deeds. Can such a faith save him? Now, suppose, same word there, let's think about this thing, he says. So he's trying to draw an illustration with that. Suppose, he says, a brother or sister is without clothes and daily food. Now, brother or sister implies maybe that you know them. It's not just some stranger on the street, but it could be a stranger on the street. It's just somebody who's in your orbit. Suppose a brother or sister is without clothes or daily food, and one of you says to him, well, go in peace, keep warm, well fed, but does nothing about their physical needs. Well, what good is that? Well, it's no good, right? I mean, especially if you were the person without clothes or food, you would see immediately it was no good. So what James is saying is that if you see somebody and you could make a difference, and then you don't do anything but talk to them. Probably a better example in modern day church, you probably wouldn't say, go be warm, well fed. You probably wouldn't do that. What you'd probably do is say, hey, I'm going to pray for you. I'm going to pray for you about this. And then you'd leave. Well, what good is that? Well, if this person needs $20 and you've got $20, and you say, well, I'll pray about that, and you leave, well, what have you done? I mean, you could have made a difference. You could have addressed something. Well, I prayed. Well, that's cool, but there's a possibility here for some Christians that you only offered to pray to get out of the situation, and not because you really cared. Somebody's sitting there hurting, we have this and this and this need. Hey, I'll pray about that. And they say, I appreciate the prayers. And then you're backing away and you're off the hook. And it was just a way to get you off the hook. And if it was somebody you loved, you wouldn't do that. I mean, you wouldn't. If one of my kids called and they were broke down in a bad neighborhood, and Dad, I need $50, $100, I'm in trouble, what are we going to do? I would do whatever I could to help them out. I wouldn't even think about it. Whatever I could. I wouldn't say, hey, I'll pray about that. Thanks for calling. I'll be praying all afternoon, Don't even worry about it. Dad's on the case. No, I mean, I would do something, right? If it was somebody that I knew and I loved, but sometimes I can be tempted with somebody on the edges of my vision to ignore that. And sadly, sometimes to not even see it at all. We live in a town where there's a lot of people who are in a bad way. We live in a town where there's still too much drug stuff going on, where there's still some people who are just caught in some miserable situations. We have some people who call the church and they ask for help. Can you help us with this, or can you help us with that, and need a little money for this and need a little money for that. And sometimes we help with finances. Sometimes we try to help them a little bit financially. We can't do every one, but we do what we can. I don't usually take those calls. Lori usually takes those calls. She's our secretary. She usually takes those calls. And Lori will take the calls and see what's going on and let me know, hey, we need to do this and this and this. Well, what Lori started doing, though, is that Lori would start, if the person called and said, I just need somebody to come over and help me out with some things, she'd start sending us over there to help. Well, we'll come right out, she'd say. Well, we'll come take care of that. Well, I didn't really actually want to do anything, right? And again, the benefit of working here at the church is that when I give money from the church, it's not my money, right? I'm spending money that we budgeted. I might feel real righteous because of it, but it wasn't any sacrifice for me. But if I have to go over there and do something, well, that's a tremendous sacrifice for me. I had a whole different day planned. And Lori says, well, isn't that the kind of thing we're supposed to be doing? Yes. And so you go over there, right? And you do it. Because who are we trying to be, right? Who are we trying to be? I mean, and I resist that. And if you resist it too, I mean, I understand. I do. But what James is saying here, with this whole section, I've left it on the screen for a long time. If you see the need and you don't do anything, he's saying you don't have faith. And in case you missed that, this is verse 15 and 16. Verse 17 says, in the same way, faith by itself, not accompanied by action, is dead. This will not save you. You cannot get to heaven on that kind of faith. That's what James is saying. When you see those things and turn a cold heart to it, when you see those things and you don't respond, when you see those things and you just ignore it, it's not real faith. You don't have real faith. If you wondered if I had real faith, here's a test for you. How do you respond in those situations? I don't do anything. Well, then you don't have real faith. That's what James is saying. And he's saying it in such a dark, black and white kind of term that a lot of people have been nervous about this passage through the years. Well, that can't be what he means. Well, that can't be what he means, but I think it is what he means. I think he's saying that if you can do something and you just turn. So, as Christians, man, we have to pray that we can become the kind of people who see those things and who respond to those things. We've got to pray that we become the kind of people who notice when other people are in trouble and hurting and broken. We notice it, and then we've got to be willing to stick ourselves into those situations. It's not enough to say that you care. It's not enough to say that you'll pray about it. You got to do something. Kevin Carter is a photographer, and he took this picture. And it was in Sudan during a famine. This little girl in the picture was with a crowd of kids, but she was too weak to go on, and so she collapsed there. And as soon as she collapsed, this vulture landed behind her. And Kevin Carter took a picture of it. And it was the Pulitzer Prize winner for pictures that year. It won the award for most important, I guess, photograph. And now we found out later that the little girl did make it to the food, and Kevin Carter chased the vulture away. But there were guys around with guns who were watching the situation, and this girl was on the wrong tribe, the wrong group, and the soldiers didn't care if she lived or died, and they wouldn't let anybody help them. You know, if they could get to the food, great, but they're not going to help them. And so Carter didn't do anything. And when he won his award and this picture became famous, people online are awful. People online are cruel and mean, and the internet's a vicious place. And they would ask him, well, what did you do about it? You took a picture. Well, that's great. What did you do about it? And he had to admit, well, I guess I didn't do very much of anything. And the trolling was vicious. You know, well, if I had been there, they said, I would have done something. I can't believe you didn't do anything. And it was intense enough that after he won the award, a few months later, he took his life. He never could get past that idea that I was there and I could have done something. Now, I want to take issue with the people who were challenging him. Most of those people were lying when they said, if I had been there, I would have done something. Because we see need. We don't see this need, but we see need all the time, and we don't do anything. We like to think of ourselves as pretty good people, and yet we can drive by the same broken down person or the same broken down house or the same broken down neighborhood and never, ever, ever, ever think about doing anything to make a difference there. It's not my concern. It's not my problem. Unless, of course, you're a Christian. And then it is your problem. Then it is your concern. The idea that you can just turn a blind eye to it. What do you think faith is about? I mean, there's a lot of ways to define faith, but one very important way to define faith is this notion that I believe that Jesus knows how to run my life better than I do. One mark of faith is I believe that Jesus knows how to live my life better than I do. And Jesus says a better use of my life would be serving those people who can't help me at all, who can't elevate me, who won't influence me, who won't make me more famous or more important. When I turn my eye to the people who are a little bit draining and who seem like they're never getting it together, and I try to give them a hand up, that's what Jesus would do. And he did it. He did it all the stinking time. There's this moment where he's going through the crowd, and the crowd's crushing against him, and a woman who's been bleeding for 12 years, she touches him, and he stops, and he talks to her, and they have this whole conversation. There's a time when he's trying to rush through Jericho, and he sees Zacchaeus up in a tree, and he stops, and he talks to him. There's a time when he's trying to get out of town fast, and as he's leaving, there's this beggar on the side of the road, a guy named Bartimaeus, and he says, "Jesus, Son of David, have mercy on me." And he stops, and he just talks to him. Jesus was always seeing those guys on the edges. And Jesus knows how to live my life better than I do. And he says that's what I'm supposed to do. And I can think of 1,000 reasons why that's a bad idea. It might be risky. It might be dangerous. If I give my last $20 to this thing, then I won't have $20. You know the sad part? Even if it's not my last 20, if I've got lots and lots and lots of 20s, but if I give my 20 to this person, they might waste it. Now, I might waste it, but it's my 20. I can think of lots of reasons why Jesus is wrong, but part of faith is believing that Jesus knows how to live my life better than I do. And he tells me if I'm going to be a person of faith, then I've got to be somebody who's... So let's think about this thing. When I was going through it, I started thinking about it, and I want to challenge you to think about it. Who am I reaching? And when I say that, I mean, think of a name. I mean, who am I serving? Who am I helping? Who am I giving to? Who am I supporting? Who am I trying to lift up? And it was hard for me to think of names on some of those questions. Who am I discipling? Who am I trying to help know Jesus better? Who am I brokenhearted for? Who do I pray for all the time? You know, too often the answer to that question is me. I pray for me all the time. God help me with this. God help me with that. God fix this or fix that. I don't see the other things. And I don't want to be that kind of person. I want to be who he wants me to be. I do believe that he knows how to live my life better than I do. And so what do I need to do? Jesus, what do I need to become? Mother Teresa, who's always a scary example when you get into this kind of stuff, she tells a story about a beggar that she met. And he was in this awful house. She says, I can assure you, you've never met anybody in as rough and straight as this man. And when she goes in the house, and he's just sitting there in the dark, you know. And so she says, well, I'm going to clean your house. I'm going to wash your clothes. I'm going to do that for you. And he tries to talk her out of it, but she won't be talked out of it. So she cleans his house, and she washes his clothes. And as she's finishing up, she says, he's sitting there in the dark. She says, do you ever light your lamp? And he says, no one comes to see me. I'm not lighting my lamp. No one ever comes. And she says to him, well, what if I have the nuns at the order come to visit you? Would you light your lamp for them if they came to visit you? And he says, sure. If they came to visit me, I would light my lamp. So she tells the nuns that I want you to go visit him every day. Just go see him. And so, and then she went on. Mother Teresa had a big area she was, dealing with, and she forgot all about the man. 2 years later, she gets a message from that group of nuns, and the message was, tell my friend that the light she lit in my life continues to shine still. So you think about this, and again, the defensive part, I hear a story like that and say, well, I can't be Mother Teresa. I mean, I mean, I'm not where I want to be, but I mean, Mother Teresa. I'm a long way from that. And yet, look what she did. She cleaned his house. She washed his clothes. People came by and visited every day. I could do those things. This is not rocket science. It has a miraculous effect, but it's a miracle that I can perform. And this is what I'm called to. When they asked her about it, Mother Teresa, that and other things, she said, I don't claim anything of this work. It's God's work. I'm like a little pencil in his hand, that's all. He does the thinking. He does the writing. The pencil has nothing to do with it. The pencil has only to allow it to be used. And that's faith and works. He does everything. It's his world, and I'm grateful he lets me live in it. He's God, and I'm not. And I can't get to heaven without his hand, but I want to be a tool in his hand. And he gives me the chance to be that. And when I'm a tool in his hand, and when I let him use me that way, I never regret it. I have regretted some of the fun stuff I've done. Have you ever regretted the stuff you did that was fun at the time? I've even regretted some wholesome things I've done that were fun at the time. How many of you ever went to Disney World and regretted it later on? I regretted it about the second hour I was there. I started regretting it. And it's the happiest place on earth, but you don't always know it when you're there. But I've never regretted serving. I've never regretted giving. I've never regretted lifting someone up. And this is why he calls us to. Now, we offer in our church a lot of ways for you to do that. I mean, there's ways to serve here in the church, but we work with Life Food Pantry in town. We work with Bertha's, there's a soup kitchen in town. We work with Becky's Place, which takes in battered women. During the winter, we help with a men's warming shelter. We support a drug rehabilitation center. There's a lot of different ways that you can give your time and your energy and your effort to something. If you say, well, I don't even know where to start, well, we can help you get started if that really is what you want to do. But I bet for most of you, even in your neighborhood, there's that one family you drive by and you know you should say something, but you never do. There's that one house you go by and you know they need help. You can tell just driving by, but you never are around. You know, there's that one person who you know is going through a really miserable time. There's that one person you know who's having a hard time paying their bills. And there's things you could do. You've heard stories. I know you have. I've heard them about somebody who was just in some desperate strait, some desperate situation, and they came home and somebody had bought groceries, and the groceries are sitting there in a bag on the back step. You could be that person. And not just could, but you should be that person if you claim to be a person of faith. It's what we're called to. And all of that stuff I said about prayer, you could take that the wrong way too. I'm not saying prayer is unimportant. I think prayer is vital to this thing. I think prayer is vital to this thing. When I pray, I let God know that I'm dependent on him. I read this week too. Even when I don't feel my prayers, I'm not really into it, just the very act of stopping and thanking God or calling to God reminds me that he's God and I'm not. God, help me be used by you in this moment. A little prayer like that can do a world of good. God, work in me, change me, help me see. As we get to the end of our service, we offer you a time to do that too. And it's a pretty precious moment, actually. And I tell people, and I'm going to tell you here too, you can come up to the front while people on the sides, and you can pray with them, and they'd be thrilled to pray with you. But even if you stay where you're at, I'll say you can pray right there. But even if you stay where you're at and you pray right there, there's still something real powerful about turning to the person beside you and say, would you pray with me? Even if you just both pray quietly, both pray silently and you're just praying together. And there's something powerful about the community of prayer. And again, you do it even when you don't need it. You're on the lake and everything is going great, and God, thank you for this day. Thank you for this water and this sun, and just thank you for this day. And there's something powerful about even when you don't need it, calling out to God. God, bless this place, bless this church, bless the families here, bless those people who are broken. God, help me see them. So I'm going to challenge you here at the end of the service to pray. Ask God to move. This scripture has beaten me up all week long. And I know it won't have that effect on all of you, and that's cool. That's awesome, actually. But I bet it has the effect on some of you. And if it does, don't run away from it. This is something as Christians we need to think about. Won't you stand up? Won't the band come back up and get ready? And let's pray together.